Hey kids, this is Chef Jack again. As part of its tribute to Jack Kirby, this month DC Comics is releasing the first issue of a new Mr. Miracle series. I've got to be honest and say that I've been a fan of this character since the 1970s, when I first became aware of New Genesis and Apocalypse and everything that was related to those two worlds. With that in mind, I wanted to do a page-by-page look at the new Mr. Miracle #1. Before I get started, though, I should let you know I'm still having sore throat problems. I'm still all congested, so if my voice craps out on me, I do apologize. Just put up with me. I'm sure that this is going to be worth it. The story in this issue is by Tom King. The pencils, inks, and colors are all by Mitch Gerads. And both of these guys rose to and exceeded everything that I was hoping for in this comic book. The story is absolutely phenomenal, and the art just fits like a glove. This issue is the new #1 on my list of best comics I've read in 2017. And that's saying something, since I have read some pretty damn good comics since the beginning of the year. But this one just tops them all. The issue opens up with a full-page shot of Scott Free's face and a question. Is he a master of spectacular trickery, or is he something more? Which, of course, is a great question. But then you get to the very next page, and it's suddenly a shocking 2-page spread of Scott Free laying on the floor of his own bathroom, apparently bleeding out in a suicide attempt. You will have to decide when you confront the strangest, most incredible hero ever to appear in comics. You will see what he does. You will wonder how he does it. But always waiting in the wings are his two greatest enemies, the men who challenge him, and death himself. This image is shocking. The idea of a superhero attempting suicide like this is shocking, because the heroes that we read about in these books just don't do these kind of things. The last time I was this shocked by events in a comic book was, I think I'd have to go all the way back to when Jessica Jones revealed how she spent several years as a rape slave to the Purple Man. And, none of the other superheroes even noticed. What comes next is our first clue that Scott's attempt at suicide might have been more successful than we're being led to believe, and that his quote-unquote greatest escape, which has always been to escape from death, might still be going on. And the teacher says to the whole class, "Draw whatever you want." When they're done, the teacher asks them what they've drawn, and the children say dinosaurs, hearts, superheroes, anything, doesn't matter. Then one child says, "I drew God." So the teacher says, "That's very nice, but no one knows what God looks like." And the child, without a second's hesitation, says, "Yeah, until now." This entire page is just brilliant. There are no panels, just a sequence of images of the same child, accompanied by a joke told in unboxed captions. The child is only shown from the desk up and is clearly isolated in his environment. The clothing he's wearing tells us that this is a young Scott Free. And interestingly, each image of the child has a piece of yellowing scotch tape over his face. What I find really intriguing, though, is the message of the joke. This tells us somehow that Scott possesses knowledge and insight that nobody else does, or at least that's been hidden from the rest of us. And I think that's important. I think that this is going to be an important theme moving on from this issue. And it seems to be the theme that's driving the story. The next couple of pages felt very, very real to me, because the way people around Scott here are talking is the way people really talk in this circumstance. It's disturbing and it's realistic. Everyone is dealing with the immediate aftermath. Waiting in the hospital for news. Coming home after. The pages display how Barda reacts. Barda, who loves Scott more than anyone could ever describe and always has. How Scott himself is reacting to the fact that he tried to kill himself. How their friends are reacting. How the general public is reacting. It hurts. It hits hard and it hurts. In the middle of these 3 pages of really emotional goings-on where everybody around Scott is trying to find a justification for his suicide attempt, or an explanation, or some reason to make themselves feel better about the fact that their friend, or in Barda's case, her husband, tried to kill herself. There is the second clue that something right under the surface is moving just out of sight, and that this might be why Scott tried to kill himself in the first place. And it's abrupt and it's scary. Now, this clue is repeated on each of these 3 pages, and it's a simple single panel with 2 words on it. But damn if it's not scary. It's a scary, scary message. Darkseid is. And that's all we need to know that some shit's going down that we don't want to have go down. Orion, who, if you remember, is the son of Darkseid, but he was raised on New Genesis, boom tubes his way into Scott and Barda's apartment to quote-unquote teach Scott, who, if you remember, is the son of Highfather but raised on Apocalypse, the error of his ways through a solid beatdown. After Barda puts Orion in his place because only Granny can teach, quote-unquote, Orion departs. But this leads to Scott suffering an even bigger blow than being beaten by Orion. Barda, he begins, and she shushes him because she thinks that he's about to say something about the beatdown. Scott, he's an ass. He's always an ass. He's just dealing with this and you like he does. But he's got something bigger to say. No, Barda, your eyes. They're not blue. They were blue. They're brown. Why are they brown? And of course her response is, Scott, don't be crazy. They've always been brown. How hard did he hit you? It's nightmare logic. This is our next clue that the world is not what we think it is. And this little moment was, it's just one of those scary little things. It's one of those scary little things. One of those minor details that when you notice it, send a shiver down your spine because you realize that there is some seriously deep behind-the-scenes shit going on. To further illustrate what I mean about these kind of moments, back in 1987, John Carpenter released a movie called Prince of Darkness. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It's a fun horror movie. Anyway, it's about a bunch of college students who are called upon by a priest to investigate whether or not the local church actually has the devil imprisoned in the basement. Yeah, I know it sounds silly, but believe it or not, it works. Anyway, at one point, Jameson Parker, who plays one of the college students, is doing this card trick where he's making the card look like it's vanishing from his hand, when really he's folding it up against the back of his fingers. It's a common sleight of hand thing. I know how to do it. A lot of people know how to do this kind of thing. Anyway, they're all standing around and they're talking about the impossibilities of magic and how, it can't possibly be the devil in the basement because, science just won't let it work and physics says otherwise and magic is impossible. And all the while during this discussion, Jameson Parker is doing this trick, trying to get it right. And at one point, blam, the card vanishes from his hand and he's standing there and then he curls his fingers around and the card is gone. Not just vanished from his palm and hidden against the back of his fingers. It has vaporized. And that was one of the scariest things, given the context, it was one of the scariest things I have ever seen in any movie. And this bit with Barda's eyes hit me in the same exact way. It was just creepy. And it works. Speaking of creepy, the next 4 pages are like a stomach punch. In an already relentless comic book, these 4 are, this is just a kick to the gut. What you have is a sequence of heavily warped panels. Each one, it's stylized to be like TV static. The first thing that happens is Mr. Miracle performs a rather gruesome escape on a late night television show before going over to do the usual sit-down interview with the host. Now the host is named Godfrey. And anybody who is a fan of Kirby and his new gods knows the name Glorious Godfrey and knows that Glorious Godfrey's job is to spread pro-Darkseid propaganda. He's the mouthpiece. He's the face, the pretty boy who basically gets the message out there. He converts people into worshipers by way of persuasion. The thing is, Mr. Miracle knows this, but in the comic he doesn't seem to make the connection. And of course Godfrey asks him about the suicide attempt, and Miracle says, kind of hesitatingly, that his suicide attempt was a trick. His search for a greater challenge that led him to consider, well, what can't I escape from? What shouldn't I escape from? At which point Godfrey says, death. Nobody escapes death. Okay, so I killed myself. At which point Mr. Miracle mimes cutting his throat, and there's this noise, he does the strangling myself thing. And the audience roars with laughter, and there's lots and lots of applause. And all the while, the distortion is getting worse and worse and worse. And then Godfrey looks straight at the camera. Godfrey points out that it leaves one question unanswered. Mr. Miracle says, it does, doesn't it? Godfrey looks right at the camera and says, did you actually really escape? I mean, death, right? Did you escape death, Mr. Miracle? And the only response is uncomfortable silence. And then Scott going, what? It's unnerving. It's horribly unnerving. It's creepy and it's disturbing, and it's just one more thing stacked onto an entire issue full of holy shit moments. And then they do something that is absolutely disturbing. Godfrey looks in the camera again and says, oh, sorry, my apologies, we've got to take a break. Earn some money with those very fine commercials. Don't worry, folks, we'll come right back. As if he didn't just throw us all off the bus while it was moving at 80 miles an hour. As if he didn't just kick our feet out from under us by, pulling the rug out. Because now we're questioning everything that's happened up until this point in the comic book. Did Scott really escape death? We don't know. We don't know. After that, things accelerate quickly. The very next page is an encounter between Highfather, who is, of course, the supreme god of New Genesis, and Mr. Miracle, who is his son. What this page tells us is that the two never really had that close a relationship, which is understandable. Highfather sold Scott as a hostage to Darkseid when he was a kid. How is Scott supposed to recover from that? But it also lets us in on a lot of important information. A lot more than it looks like, because most of it just seems to be a back and forth between father and son. After some banter back and forth about Orion, Highfather apologizes to Scott. He says, I'm sorry it took me so long. I would have come right after I heard about your incident, but a crisis on New Genesis has arisen, one unlike we've ever known. Scott asks, Darkseid, the anti-life equation? Highfather nods and says, after many bloody failures, I've finally placed a spy in Darkseid's inner circle. This man tragically reports the damage has been done. Darkseid now has the equation. This causes Scott some understandable apprehension. He goes, wait, he's already got it? And Highfather says, with the equation, Darkseid will be able to change reality, to change men's minds. This is why I cannot stay longer, Scott. I would like to stay longer. However, Darkseid. To which Scott just says, yes, Father, of course, I get it. You get the feeling here that Scott is used to his dad putting his kids, or especially Scott, secondary to running New Genesis and secondary to a lot of other different things, and there might be a little bit of resentment there. I think that's a very interesting piece of character development. And maybe just one more piece to the puzzle of why Scott killed him, or tried to kill himself. The next couple of pages is a sequence in which Scott interacts with Oberon, who is his stage manager and his prop manager. And, in the scene, Oberon, out of nowhere, repeats the joke that we heard at the beginning about the kid who drew God and how nobody knows what God looks like until the kid says, well, now they do. It seems like a fairly normal scene until we get to the point where Barda says, wait a second, Scott, Oberon died of cancer. He was suffering and he was gone, and we actually had to make the decision to turn his life support off. It's one more of these creepy-ass clues that there's something going wrong here. It's just creeping up on us. Now, I've got to direct your attention to something at this point. Throughout this issue, up until this sequence, with very few exceptions, namely the 2-page spread where you saw him on the bathroom floor and the page with the child at the desk telling the story, pretty much every page of this comic has been a 9-panel grid, 3x3. Anybody who's read The Watchmen or Omega Man or even Batman knows this 3x3 9-panel grid per page. Most of Mr. Miracle 1 is on this grid. And there's a lot of interesting things going on throughout the issue. The Godfrey sequence, for example, contains a conspicuous amount of black ink, as images within the 9 panels are reduced further inside to allow the dialogue to run. White on black captions beneath a television image. And as the distortion increases, the panels almost bleed into each other. It's really well done. But what I want to point out is actually the Dark Side Is panels. Let's back up for a minute. Beginning just after Scott arrives at the hospital on page 3, every page in the book contains an all-black panel that has the phrase Dark Side Is in it. Of course, the exceptions are the beginning, the pre-hospital stuff. Also, the page that has Highfather on it doesn't have the black panel in it. And the final 2 pages don't have it either. The phrase has seen a good deal of use in Darkseid stories since Darkseid was introduced. Darkseid is. That seems to be a byword of Darkseid. That's how he is announced. He just is. Especially when he's triumphant. Final Crisis, which was another epic that saw Darkseid bend the universe to his will, used that phrase all over the place. In a cosmos devoid of hope and devoid of choice, Darkseid encompasses everything. Darkseid is. The first instance this issue comes after the ambulance and before Scott awakens in the hospital. In other words, if he's in the realm of the dead, this is the very panel that he shows up there. The panel repeats just before Orion's arrival and before his quote-unquote lesson and before his reprieve. It's astonishingly effective punctuation. It drops in a moment of calm between Scott and his wife before he realizes that her eyes are the wrong color. But in the Oberon scene, things start to fall apart because now there are 2 black panels on the page, and they seem to come in the midst of mundane activity. And when Barda tells him the truth, how Oberon is regretfully dead now, there are 4. Every other panel, like a checkerboard. The checkerboard reverses on the next page because now there's 5 out of the 9. That's a majority, punctuating every single moment, every single thought. For all of Scott's protestations that his suicide was one more escape act, it was just a trick, this reads a lot like a case of depression. There are any number of ways this could play out, either broadly or subtly over the course of a 12-issue series. And I gotta say, King and Garads are strong enough storytellers to pull this off if they're careful. And then you get one huge page. Darkseid is the entire fucking page. Darkseid is. From there, the end of the issue comes on pretty quickly. By way of the mother box, Orion contacts Scott and Barta and calls them home to New Genesis, telling them that Darkseid is attacking, Highfather is dead, and that there's a new war on. Before they step through the boom tube, Mr. Miracle again confesses that something isn't right. He says, "Everything's wrong. I don't know how to escape this." Barta, in a repeat of Orion's actions earlier, attempts to snap her husband out of his existential dread by slapping him in the face, which knocks him to the ground. And then telling him, get up, get his head straight, because, they've got to go fight a war now. For the moment, it seems to work. And, side by side, they step into the boom tube. And that's where this issue ends. All told, I gotta say, this comic book was an extraordinarily heavy read. It really gets, under your skin. It gut punches you a couple of times. It gets to you. But it's also extraordinarily rewarding. This was a fantastic story. Sure, it didn't have a lot of action in it, but so much happened. And there's this threat that's right out of our reach, that's right behind our eyes. We can't see it yet. And it's greater than any giant monster. It's greater even than Darkseid himself. The story was stunning and original and unexpected and powerful. And if you're a fan of Kirby's characters, especially Mr. Miracle, on the one hand, you might be a little upset to see Mr. Miracle, a suicide attempt just doesn't seem to fit his original character. But it's not all that out of place. Not when you think about it. There's nothing out of place here in terms of the Mr. Miracle concept or Scott and Barta as a loving couple, as they've been established for the last, 3-4 decades. These are recognizably the same characters. Nothing is being done to twist them. Their love is still strong. It's still precisely the way we've seen them time and again. Everything about them is the same, but it's also so very different. Readers who are coming to these characters for the very first time should be able to empathize with them immediately, and they can easily take the other characters in the story in stride, because all the relationships are clear, and the rest you can learn later. This was just a perfect comic book. It was quite literally perfect. So, with all that said, there is my in-depth review of Mr. Miracle #1. What did you think? Have you read it yourself? If you did, what did you think? Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? Let me know. Do you plan on reading it now that you've seen my review? I can't recommend it enough. I really can't. Either way, let us know. Feel free to talk about this in the comments. I love talking about these issues. If you like the video, please click the like button. If you haven't already, and you like the videos that we're doing, hit subscribe. Hit the little notification bell next to the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future videos. Share this video with your friends so they can see what we're up to also. If you really like what we're doing and you want to give us a hand, we've got a Patreon page. We've got a VidMe page linked below. Feel free to go on over there, maybe drop $1 or $2 in the till. We appreciate any help you guys can give us. But even if you didn't, even if you can't, or you don't feel like it or whatever, we don't really, the reason doesn't matter. Anyway, thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest. And thank you very, very much for watching.